well, welcome. Welcome again to the conference here today, the PACC Conference, Activism and Empowerment. It's been a long day, yes? But we've reached the end. Everyone still has energy? All right, wonderful. Wonderful. Before we get started, I'm just going to take about 1 minute here to take a little bit of a privilege of introducing Marc and speaking for a second about the moment that we're in, right? As Palestinians, it is a different time than it's been in the last 15, 10, 20, 30 years. We are entering a time now where we see presidential candidates and presidential politics putting Palestine at the forefront. And everyone should make no mistake, while it seems like this is all happening very quickly, and it kind of is, it is the result of decades of hard work of every Palestinian in America making our voices heard since they got here. So take credit for that as a community. And in the spirit of Marc's talk today, it also comes from years and years and years. People think that solidarity between the Black and Palestinian community in America just started in the last 5 or 10 years. That's not true. This stuff has been going on for decades. We haven't always done the best job of putting it at the forefront, and things fell off in the last 20 years. But now it's coming back. But what's coming back today through Marc and many Black intellectuals like him in America is a revival of a Palestinian tradition of showing solidarity with our Black brethren here in America and in South Africa for decades. So we should be very proud of that, and we should understand that it comes from a long, long tradition, and we are starting to see some of the fruits of it, whether it is resolutions in Congress or people getting fired from CNN. All right, so my name, as some of you might know, is I don't want to say as you all know, as some of you might know, is Ahmed Zahid. I am a comedian and a professor of law and an activist, and originally Palestinian from Nazareth, like Jesus. That's what I tell white people, Marc. If you're like Jesus, it does help. They still don't believe us. And it is my pleasure today to introduce our final speaker today, one of the leading intellectual voices in our country. He's been a BET News correspondent. He has been a political commentator for CNN and Fox. He was, as you all might remember, impolitely dismissed from his position at CNN after remarks before the UN on the Palestinian-Israeli, it says conflict here, but it's not really a conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli issue. And he's an award-winning journalist, receiving numerous prestigious awards from the National Association of Black Journalists, GLAAD, the International Academy of Digital Arts and Scientists, and Ebony Magazine has named him one of America's 100 most influential Black leaders. Dr. Hill is the Steve Charles Professor of Media, Cities, and Solutions at Temple University. He's from Philly. I'm from Philly. I think we're the only two people from Philly here, so we'll take that. There's more people from Philly? All right. It's a short drive. And he received his bachelor's degree from Philly and his PhD from Philly as well at the University of Pennsylvania, his bachelor's degree from Temple, and trained in as an anthropologist of education. The way we're going to do this is Professor Hill will talk for about 20 minutes, and then he and I will have a sort of back and forth interview for a little while after that, and then we'll open it up to everybody for questions, all right? So with that, it is our pleasure here at the Palestinian American Community Center to welcome, as our final speaker here today at our conference, Dr. Marc Lamont Hill.
Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you. It is such an honor to be here with you all today. I am genuinely overwhelmed by the love and support that I have received from the Palestinian community since November 28th, I believe. Yeah. And the 29th. 28th was bad. 29th was worse. 28th was the frying pan, 29th was the fire. And they were both bad for different reasons, but on both days, I had support from the Palestinian community, I had support from the Muslim community, I had support from freedom fighters of every race, every color, every religion, every country, who believe in a free Palestine. And it is the belief in a free Palestine that drives us here today. And I am honored that you all invited me to say just a little bit about what I think this moment is and about what I think we can do with this moment. As dark as this moment is, I see possibility. The moment is dark, though. We need to be very clear about why this moment is dark. A few years ago, America elected somebody named Trump. Y'all heard about this, right? It was a stunning election for many people because we said, how could somebody so wildly unqualified, so poorly educated on the issues of the day, so devoid of any kind of worldview, how could somebody, that guy from the reality show, how could he become president? It is like a running joke. And in doing so, we opened up as a nation some of our own wounds, and we exposed some of our deepest problems. We exposed the fact that despite saying that we are in a post-racial world after Obama, we realized that the world wasn't so post-racial because a whole bunch of folk voted for white supremacy in 2016. A whole bunch of folk voted for Islamophobia in 2016. A whole bunch of folk voted to move back the clock and move back the calendar to a year that we thought we had passed. And so because of that moment, we saw a shift that reflects the darkness of the moment, particularly as it speaks to Palestine. Donald Trump, over the last couple of years, we've seen the move of the embassy, or the proposal to move the U.S. embassy. We've seen Donald Trump do what almost no nation has done since 1967, and certainly since 1981, and that is to recognize Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, despite the fact that it contravenes international law, despite the fact that the global community says no, despite the fact that it is a provocative gesture. Trump does it anyway. We've seen a cut of UNRWA. We have seen now a cut of U.S. aid. We have just seen in Golan a decision to once again contravene and completely disregard international law with regard to land taken by force. We have essentially watched Donald Trump attempt to resolve the question of Israel, Palestine, unilaterally, in a way that marginalizes, isolates, and in some ways even attempts to destroy the Palestinian people. It's against that backdrop that we are watching politics play out. We're watching Donald Trump do this. But this ain't just Trump, and this is what makes the moment so dark. Yeah, Trump moved the embassy, but the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress had already agreed to move the embassy, and all they do is file a waiver every couple of years. In other words, Trump is American policy on steroids. He's not new policy, he's just American policy on steroids. Other American presidents said that they would recognize Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, despite the fact that it violates international law. Other presidents have also said that they support Israel only. Other presidents have also said that they do not support the rights of Palestinian people. So Donald Trump is an extreme example of a fundamental problem that we have to uproot. But what makes the moment so dark is that so much is at stake. And at the very same time that we see that, in 2014, we saw something else. A little boy named Mike Brown in Ferguson. He was killed on the ground, laid there for 4.5 hours. I flew there to cover the story, and when I got there, you could still see the blood on the concrete. You could see people still weeping. It was like an Azza. You go there, and 2-3 days later, people are still mourning and serving each other food and talking and trying to come to terms with the grief of this boy who was unarmed, who was 18 years old, who did nothing to deserve to die, was still executed in the street. His body was out there for 4.5 hours. Nobody came to save him. Nobody came to support him. Nobody came to even cover his body. It took hours for them to put a sheet over his body. And when they finally put the sheet over his body, it couldn't even cover his whole body. His feet peeked out from the bottom. They pulled it down. His head peeked up from the top. You could smell death in the air because they left this little boy on the ground as if he belonged to nobody. And we protested. And we resisted. And we cried. Because that boy was dead. And the state watched him die. And the state watches lots of black bodies die. And the state did nothing about it. And so we resisted. And we took to the streets of Ferguson. And we felt those tears together. And we felt solidarity together. Because while we were in those streets, we were saying, free Mike. We were saying, we wanted to arrest Darren Wilson, some folk did. We wanted justice for Michael Brown. We wanted justice for the whole system of people who had been disenfranchised. And there were also people there who were screaming, free Palestine. From Ferguson to Palestine, occupation is a crime. Because those folk were occupying Palestine, and at the very same time, folk were occupying Ferguson. And at the very same time, Gaza had been, which is already besieged, was being bombed for 51 days. And so Gaza is being bombed, and we're in Ferguson being occupied, and we're at some point getting tear gassed. The news outlet said we weren't getting tear gas. They said it was just smoke. They said it was just a warning. Now, I was there. Anybody here who's been tear gassed know you don't confuse tear gas with nothing else. When you getting tear gas, you know you're getting tear gas. There's no confusion about tear gas. And we were getting tear gas, and we couldn't breathe, and we couldn't think straight, and we couldn't open our eyes, and we're crying. And at that very same moment that we were tweeting desperately to the world to say, hey, we are getting tear gas, and state violence is preventing us from protesting, we got tweets from Ramallah. People like Miriam Barghouti, who had just been participating in Gaza protests. She was in the West Bank, protesting what was happening in Gaza, and she said, well, you have to run toward the wind. Here's how you clean your eyes out. Here's how you wrap the shirt around your face so that you protect yourself from the gas. They said, stand closer. A good lesson for me. Stand closer to the enemy. Not you. You're great. You're from Philly. Stand closer to the enemy. Because if you stand too close, they can't tear gas you. If it's too close, they thrive on the distance. And suddenly, those tweets were not just life-saving in the literal sense. They helped remind us that solidarity is possible. They helped remind us that the work we have to do together can make us stronger. They reminded us that the challenges we face are international. It's not just that the communication was international, it's that the solutions are international, transnational. We can't win unless we work together, and so many of us packed up and went to Palestine for the first time. We got there in January 2015. We got to Palestine and we talked. We studied. We met with amazing groups. We met with Idala. We met with Aswat. We met with, we met with so many wonderful organizations. We met with so many organizers. We met with so many activists on the ground. And we got to see what occupation looked like up close. And for us as black activists, it was important for us to see that. For me, personally, it was important for me to not just read about. I had been reading and supporting Palestine long before that. I was on CNN debating Alan Dershowitz. Pause for groans. Long before I had gone to Palestine, because I knew what the right side of history looked like. But now we were there. And when we were there, we were part of this renewal that you talked about. This idea that it wasn't new back in 1967. Malcolm X, or even before this, Malcolm was dead by 67, he died in 65. But by 67, Malcolm X had already established a renewed template for going because he had gone to Gaza, he had gone to East Jerusalem, he had spent time there. After the Six-Day War, the Black Panther Party issued statements in support of the PLO. SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, issued a summer newsletter talking about colonialism and neocolonialism and settler colonialism and the need for us to resist that, not just in America, but also in Palestine. We understood our connections were international. Dr. King, Martin Luther King, Zionists will love to trot out Martin Luther King to prove that Zionism is okay. Dr. King was pro-Zionist. And first of all, it's a dishonest argument, because if Dr. King were anti-Zionist, they would just say Dr. King was wrong. Right? It's not like if Dr. King had a different position, they would all have a different position. They would all pack up and go back to Europe. But more importantly, Dr. King understood the nuances of it. He believed, as we all do in this room, that anti-Semitism is wrong. That Jewish self-determination and safety is right. It just can't come at the expense of the Palestinian people. And so by the end, when Dr. King is about to die on April 4th, 1968, he's very uncomfortable with his name being on certain lists, and he's very uneasy making public trips to the quote-unquote Holy Land because he did not want to be included in what he was beginning to see was an unjust war. Dr. King also understood that this thing was complicated. As we move through our time, everybody from Andrew Young to Jesse Jackson in the 80s understood that this issue was complicated to the extent that we cannot buy into a narrative that excludes or silences Palestinian people. And they also understood that our liberation is tied up with yours and your liberation is tied up with ours. So the question then becomes, because I don't want to take up too much time, the question then becomes, what do we do? We have to be courageous, family. We have to be courageous. What does it mean to be courageous? To be courageous doesn't mean that you are without fear. I get scared. Y'all get scared. We all get scared. Courage doesn't mean that we're without fear. It means that we feel the fear and we fight anyway. We tell the truth anyway. We struggle anyway. We remain steadfast, sumud, anyway. So when we see Ilhan Omar speak the truth and people run, when I speak the truth and people run, it's not like nobody else agreed with me. Do you know how many text messages I got from CNN folk? Yo, you was right, dog. Thanks. Feel free to tell them. I know. But there is a fear that if we speak out, we will lose our jobs. We will lose our protection. We will lose our friendship circles. And no, I'm not talking about, because there are some snitches and informants in the room, so let me be very clear, fellow collaborators. I am not saying that there is some secret conspiracy. I am not saying that there's some secret cabal. I'm simply saying that if you have a position that is unpopular, it will make you unemployable. Whether it's on the environment, whether it's on guns, whether it's on drugs, whether it's on Israel, whatever the issue is, if you take an unpopular position and you operate against the interests of power, and by power I'm talking about state power, if you do that, you're going to take a risk. But we must take that risk. Justice requires that we take that risk anyway. And that we don't allow people to reverse or reshape the narrative in ways that place on the defensive as if we're not on the right side of history. When Ilhan Omar speaks to the fact that there are special interest groups, when she speaks to the fact that there are lobbies, that's not a radical statement. There's a gun lobby. There's an environmental lobby. There's all kinds of lobbies. And yes, there is an Israel lobby. And we must have the courage to mute our phones and speak out to say that there is a lobby. We must resist anti-Semitic narratives. We must resist anti-Semitic tropes. But we must also be able, at the same time that we do those necessary things, we must also point out that there is a lobby. And that there are major forces in play that keep particular lobbies moving. And again, it's not a conspiracy, it's just how politics works. We must organize to do the same thing. We must speak the truth even when it is difficult. We must speak the truth, as Prophet Muhammad said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, speak the truth though it may be bitter. We must be willing to fight and organize. But lastly, we must also be willing to be self-critical. We must be willing to challenge ourselves to organize and do better. I was at an event, it was an AMP event, maybe a year and a half ago I was speaking. And was that when it was? Yeah. I go to a lot of AMP and CARE events. It runs together after a while. And with the particular city, I was in like 4 of them. But after I gave a talk, this woman walked up to me and she said to me, "You are great, I love you." I said, "Thank you." She asked me, I told her about the work, I study Afro-Palestinians in Jerusalem. And I was telling her about the Afro-Palestinians in Jerusalem. And she said, "Oh, they're wonderful people. They're beautiful, they're smart, they're respectful. Not like the blacks here." Can't take it out of me. So like so she didn't know, right? So I'm like, in Wallet at home. I'm a black from here. And it's like this awkward moment, right? And you know when somebody says some real racist shit, like they didn't try to explain to you how it wasn't. So she's like, "Oh, no, that's not what I mean. I just mean you're beautiful like them. You're just not like the others here. You work." I mean, it was, so now one of the organizers is like, no, Khalti, come on, we gotta go. And she's like, no, let me explain some more. And we're kind of joking, and it's kind of funny now, but in that moment I was humiliated. I mean, can you imagine coming to a solidarity event? And again, she meant no harm, but that doesn't mean she didn't cause harm. We have to learn how to engage each other. How can we talk in ways that speak truth, that put a spotlight on our contradictions, so that we can say, we got a lot of anti-black racism to undo. We got to. This is part of what it means. This is part of what it means to talk about the global systems of white supremacy. Part of what the Israeli nation state is founded on is not just being a Jewish state, but also being privileging a particular form of whiteness. Talk to your Ethiopian brothers and sisters who tried to make Aliyah in '85, which I spent a great deal of time with them. They talk about the anti-blackness that they experience even within the context of a Jewish state. Talk to the kind of experiences they have versus Russian immigrants. Let's talk about the racial hierarchies within the Israeli state. That's true. We got to deal with that. But that also means when I go to Jerusalem and I go to the African quarter and they still call it Habs al-Abid, that ain't about Israel right there. We got to talk about anti-blackness within the Palestinian community because white supremacy is a global project. That means when we come to the United States and we're in our communities, what are the relationships when I go to a city like Detroit or a city like Chicago? What are the relationships between store owners and the community? Because if you're coming into our community, not engaging our community, not showing love to our community, but taking money out of our community, then at some point it becomes its own kind of occupation. And black folk, we got to deal with anti-Arab racism. We got a whole heap of Islamophobia. And there's a whole way that the black church itself has advanced the project of Zionism. Most of the time when I'm in Palestine and I see black folk there, I kind of avoid them because 90% of the time they're Zionists. So we have to unlearn all the lessons that we've been wrongly told about whose land that is, about what it means to have land, and about what justice looks like. We got work to do, family. We can show up for each other, but we have to really show up for each other. It's not enough for me to say free Palestine if I'm not on the ground willing to struggle with you, and it's not enough for you all to speak out against the American nation state and what it does in the Middle East if you don't also speak about what it's doing to black folk right here in New Jersey. We got work to do together. And we must speak the truth, though it may be bitter. We must be courageous, especially when it's difficult. We must be willing to build and organize, teach, learn, and dream together. And if we do that work, then we can create the best freedom dream we could ever imagine. And for me, the best freedom dream that we could ever imagine is a world that gives us what justice requires, which is a free Palestine, which is a world without, you clap for that, y'all Palestinians, it's all good. Justice requires a free Palestine. Justice also requires a world without class oppression, a world without homophobia, a world without transphobia, a world without ableism. We got to undo all of that. And I know if I say transphobia and homophobia, some of y'all get anxious. And it'd be easy for me to just not say that in this room, but justice requires that I do. Truth-telling requires that we do. So let us all commit today to bigger and bolder and brighter forms of truth-telling. Let us commit to struggling with the parts of ourselves that we need to undo and unlearn and reimagine and reconstruct. And when we do that, we can then finally give us freedom for everyone. Free the land.